North Korea, officially known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, has a complex and turbulent history marked by political instability and authoritarian rule. Located in East Asia, it shares a border with South Korea, China, and Russia. The Korean peninsula was divided at the end of World War II, leading to the establishment of two separate nations in 1948, the Communist North, backed by the Soviet Union, and the capitalist South, supported by the United States. This division set the stage for decades of political strife and conflict. After its formation, North Korea was initially led by Kim Il-sung, a figure who would dominate the country's politics for nearly half a century. Kim Il-sung's rise to power was facilitated by his association with the Soviet Union and the eventual military backing that led to the establishment of the DPRK. Following the end of Japanese colonial rule over Korea in 1945, Kim Il-sung, who had been part of the anti-Japanese resistance, quickly became the central political figure in the North. His leadership was characterized by the establishment of a strong personality cult, the promotion of the ideology of Juche, self-reliance, and the centralization of power under his control. Kim Il-sung's regime pursued rapid industrialization and land reforms, but the government's actions also resulted in the suppression of political opposition, mass purges, and a personality cult that dominated every aspect of society. North Korea's political instability was further heightened during the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, when the North, under Kim Il-sung, sought to unify the Korean peninsula under communist rule by invading the South. The conflict drew in both the United States and China, and after 3 years of devastating fighting, the war ended in an armistice rather than a peace treaty. This armistice established a heavily fortified border along the 38th parallel, leaving the peninsula divided. The war and its aftermath caused lasting resentment and fear of external threats, which would be a key factor in North Korean politics for decades to come. In the post-war period, Kim Il-sung focused on consolidating power through purges and the establishment of a totalitarian state. Over the years, political instability in North Korea was driven by the growing concentration of power in the hands of Kim Il-sung and his inner circle, which eventually led to a strict one-man rule. The country's political system was founded on the concept of Juche, which emphasized self-reliance and independence from foreign influence, particularly from the Soviet Union and China. However, despite this ideology, North Korea became increasingly isolated on the international stage. Kim Il-sung's rule was characterized by a series of high-profile purges of military and political leaders suspected of disloyalty, leading to constant shift in the political landscape. The state maintained strict control over every aspect of public and private life, including the economy, the media, and personal freedoms. Propaganda, indoctrination, and surveillance were used to maintain control over the population. Dissent was harshly punished, and those suspected of disloyalty were subjected to imprisonment, torture, or execution. When Kim Il-sung died in 1994, the country entered another period of political instability. His son, Kim Jong-il, succeeded him, although his leadership faced challenges due to the economic difficulties facing North Korea and ongoing food shortages. Despite these hardships, Kim Jong-il strengthened the regime's grip on power by continuing his father's policies of military-first doctrine and pursuing nuclear weapons development, which heightened tensions with the international community. His reign was marked by a continued cult of personality, with state propaganda extolling his supposed leadership abilities and his genius in various fields. Kim Jong-il's leadership also saw the continuation of North Korea's isolationist policies, as the country remained largely cut off from the global community. Despite this, North Korea's growing nuclear program became a focal point for international politics. Tensions between North Korea and the West, particularly the United States, escalated as the regime pursued nuclear weapons development, defying multiple UN Security Council resolutions. While there were occasional diplomatic overtures, such as talks with the United States and South Korea, the regime's pursuit of nuclear weapons remained a core issue of political instability. When Kim Jong-il passed away in 2011, his son, Kim Jong-un, assumed power. As the youngest son of Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's leadership was initially met with skepticism both domestically and internationally. The transition of power raised concerns about the stability of the regime, as Kim Jong-un was relatively unknown and young, with few established political allies. However, he quickly solidified his control over the country, purging rivals and consolidating power. Under Kim Jong-un, North Korea has continued its pursuit of nuclear weapons, conducting a series of missile tests and further escalating tensions with the international community. Kim Jong-un's leadership has been marked by continued emphasis on military development and the pursuit of economic self-sufficiency, despite severe sanctions imposed by the United Nations. The regime has faced significant challenges, including a deteriorating economy, food shortages, and the impact of international sanctions, but it has maintained a control over the population through an iron-fisted rule. Additionally, his government has continued the use of propaganda, surveillance, and harsh punishment for dissent, maintaining a strict hold on power. Despite occasional signs of diplomatic engagement, including summits with South Korea and the United States, North Korea's political situation remains highly unstable. Relations with South Korea have fluctuated between periods of cooperation and tension, with a nuclear issue at the center of the divide. Although there were moments of hope for a breakthrough in talks, North Korea's continued development of its nuclear arsenal and missile technology has led to a stalemate in diplomatic efforts. In conclusion, North Korea's political instability has been shaped by decades of authoritarian rule, dynastic leadership transitions, ongoing conflict with the West, and an obsessive pursuit of military power. Despite the regime's efforts to maintain internal control, the country's isolated, militarized state, along with economic difficulties and human rights abuses, ensures that political instability remains a defining characteristic of North Korea's history and future. The continuation of North Korea's political instability is deeply intertwined with its economic challenges, human rights violations, and the regime's rigid control over its citizens. The country's economy remains largely centralized, with agriculture and industry controlled by the state and economic decision-making dominated by the ruling elite. Although North Korea has made efforts to develop its economy through state-led industrialization and military production, its economic prospects have been severely hindered by international sanctions, particularly those targeting its nuclear program. These sanctions have further isolated the country from the global economy, leading to widespread poverty, food shortages, and a dependence on aid from China and other neighboring countries. The country's isolated economic system has made it increasingly difficult to improve the living for the general population. Despite the regime's assertions of self-sufficiency, most citizens live in conditions of extreme deprivation. The government's inability to effectively address economic needs has fueled internal instability, with occasional reports of famine, inadequate healthcare, and widespread malnutrition. Despite these conditions, the regime has largely remained unshaken, partly due to the strength of its security apparatus and the pervasive surveillance that limits the ability of the population to express dissent. Human rights violations in North Korea remain among the most severe in the world. The government's systematic suppression of political freedom and civil liberties has created a climate of fear and distrust. The regime maintains an extensive surveillance system to monitor the actions and thoughts of its citizens. Ordinary North Koreans are subjected to strict censorship, and any form of dissent or criticism of the leadership can lead to severe punishment, including imprisonment in one of the country's notorious labor camps. These camps, often located in remote areas, are infamous for their brutal conditions, where prisoners are subjected to forced labor, physical abuse, and a complete denial of basic rights. The regime also operates a pervasive system of political and social control, using informants and state-controlled organizations to maintain loyalty among the population. North Korea's leadership has consistently maintained a posture of defiance against foreign powers, particularly the United States, which it views as its greatest adversary. The regime's pursuit of nuclear weapons has been a central issue in its relations with the international community, contributing to repeated cycles of tension and limited diplomatic engagement. Despite engaging in talks, such as the 2018 summit between Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump, North Korea's stance on denuclearization has been inconsistent, with the regime often demanding sanctions relief in exchange for minimal concessions. The absence of significant progress on the nuclear issue, coupled with North Korea's repeated missile tests, has kept tensions high and further complicated efforts to stabilize the region. The country's foreign relations remain dominated by its alliance with China, which provides vital economic and political support. China plays a crucial role in North Korea's survival by offering economic assistance, political backing, and a channel for communication with the outside world. However, the relationship between the two countries is not without its complexities. China has at times expressed frustration with North Korea's provocations, particularly its missile and nuclear tests, yet it has been unwilling to abandon the regime, seeing North Korea as a buffer state against Western influence in East Asia. At the same time, North Korea has increasingly turned to other international allies, including Russia, for support. This alliance, though less significant than its relationship with China, provides additional diplomatic and economic leverage for North Korea. However, the isolated nature of the regime and a continuous pursuit of nuclear weapons have strained its relationships with many countries, leaving it largely isolated from the global community. Despite the considerable instability that marks North Korea's internal and external politics, the regime's survival has been attributed to the unyielding control exercised by the Kim family, which has maintained a strong grip on power through a combination of coercion, propaganda, and military force. The leadership's emphasis on national pride and military strength continues to resonate with a segment of the population, despite the harsh conditions under which most people live. The regime's resilience has led some analysts to argue that North Korea may persist in its current form for the foreseeable future, especially given the lack of viable alternatives and the continued repression of any opposition. Internally, North Korea's political future is uncertain. Kim Jong-un's leadership is still seen by many as precarious due to his relatively young age and the absence of a clear succession plan. The regime has not yet provided a mechanism for a peaceful transition of power, and any sign of weakness or internal division could lead to further instability. However, the regime's ability to maintain control over the military and security services has so far enabled it to stave off challenges to its authority. In conclusion, the political instability of North Korea is a complex issue driven by authoritarian rule, economic challenges, human rights abuses, and a constant quest for military power. While the Kim regime has managed to maintain its grip on power for over 7 decades, the internal and external pressures it faces make the country's political future highly uncertain. As long as the regime continues to prioritize military development and the centralization of power, it will likely remain a source of instability in East Asia and the wider world. However, the prospect of change, whether through internal reform or external intervention, remains an open question. As North Korea enters the 21st century, its political instability is increasingly shaped by a changing global landscape. The country's isolation and heavy reliance on its military-first policy, known as Sungun, continue to dominate its internal and external policies. Despite ongoing economic difficulties, North Korea has managed to maintain a degree of military and political strength by investing heavily in its military infrastructure and nuclear program. This military buildup has fostered a sense of national pride among some citizens, but it has also reinforced the country's reputation as a global pariah, facing significant condemnation from the international community. One of the central issues contributing to North Korea's political instability is its unpredictable and often aggressive foreign policy. The regime's emphasis on nuclear weapons development has escalated tensions, not only with the United States but also with its neighbors, including South Korea and Japan. North Korea has conducted numerous missile tests, and its nuclear weapons program has become a focal point of international concern. Despite occasional diplomatic efforts, such as summit with the United States, the regime's commitment to denuclearization has remained unclear, leading to skepticism in the West regarding any potential long-term agreements. These actions have led to increased sanctions and diplomatic isolation, further contributing to the country's economic stagnation and limited international cooperation. On the domestic front, North Korea continues to exert a level of control over its citizens that is unparalleled in many parts of the world. The regime maintains tight control over all aspects of life, from the media to the education system, using propaganda to glorify the ruling family and ensure loyalty. The political culture is deeply rooted in the Kim family's ideology, and the state emphasizes a continued focus on the military and self-reliance through Jush, despite the overwhelming challenges it faces. At the same time, any form of dissent is brutally suppressed, and those accused of disloyalty can face imprisonment, torture, or even execution. This repression has contributed to a climate of fear, where ordinary citizens are afraid to question the regime's policies or leadership. The country's economic difficulties, exacerbated by its isolation, have created a volatile situation. Although North Korea has a history of periodic famines and food shortages, the situation has worsened in recent years, in part due to international sanctions, mismanagement, and a lack of technological advancement. While the country has maintained a large military presence, civilian sectors like agriculture, healthcare, and education have been underfunded, leading to widespread poverty and shortages of basic necessities. The economy is also highly dependent on foreign aid, primarily from China, and a lack of foreign investment has stunted growth. The lack of transparency and limited economic reforms have made it difficult to assess the true state of North Korea's economy, though reports from defectors and international organizations suggest that it is in a precarious state. The ongoing political instability is also fueled by North Korea's inability to address its demographic challenges. The population is aging, with a relatively small percentage of young people entering the workforce to replace an aging labor force. This demographic shift, coupled with the regime's resistance to significant reforms, may exacerbate the country's economic difficulties in the coming years. Although the government has implemented measures to control the population through tight regulations and policies, including limiting contact with foreigners and punishing those who attempt to leave the country, it has faced growing pressure from the economic and social strains within. The leadership transition from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il and, later, to Kim Jong-un has not been smooth or without challenges. Despite the initial uncertainty surrounding Kim Jong-un's rise to power after his father's death in 2011, he has been able to solidify his position by purging high-ranking officials who could challenge his rule. Notably, the execution of his uncle, Jang Song-theek, and the sidelining of other key figures in the regime have shown that Kim Jong-un is committed to maintaining tight control over the country's leadership. However, his leadership has faced continued scrutiny, and some analysts have questioned his ability to maintain the same level of control his father and grandfather had. While Kim Jong-un's rule is marked by a more youthful and modern persona, he continues to rely on the legacy of his family and the strength of the military to maintain power. Under his leadership, there have been significant advancements in North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities, which have both enhanced the regime's prestige and raised the stakes of international diplomacy. Kim Jong-un's leadership style has been seen as more pragmatic in some respects, particularly regarding economic reforms, but his regime remains as oppressive as ever. The regime's internal surveillance systems have become more sophisticated, and the government has increasingly employed digital technologies to monitor citizens and suppress any form of dissent. Despite the ongoing political instability, North Korea's authoritarian regime has shown a remarkable ability to survive, due in large part to the concentration of power in the hands of the ruling Kim family and the military. The regime's use of military parades, public demonstrations, and state-controlled media has helped to foster a sense of unity and patriotism among its population, despite the overwhelming economic and social hardships. Moreover, the regime's ability to maintain control over its security apparatus and prevent external challenges has been a key factor in its continued survival. While it is difficult to predict the future of North Korea, it seems unlikely that the country will undergo significant political change in the near future. The leadership remained committed to maintaining its hold on power through a combination of military force, political repression, and economic isolation. However, the challenges facing North Korea, including its economic difficulties, aging population, and the growing international pressure surrounding its nuclear program, could lead to further instability in the years to come. The ongoing tension between the North Korean regime and the international community, as well as internal pressure from an increasingly disillusioned population, suggests that the political landscape of North Korea will remain volatile, even if it is unable to undergo significant reforms or transitions. In summary, North Korea's political instability continues to be shaped by its authoritarian leadership, military-first policies, isolation from the international community, and economic hardships. The country's future remains uncertain, with ongoing tensions between its ruling regime and the rest of the world. However, the regime's continued grip on power, backed by a combination of repression, military strength, and political control, ensures that North Korea will likely remain a source of instability and a critical issue in regional and global geopolitics for the foreseeable future. As North Korea moves further into the 21st century, its political instability remains closely tied to its unpredictable leadership and the ongoing challenges posed by its economic and geopolitical isolation. The persistent tensions with the international community, particularly over its nuclear program, show no signs of abating. The nuclear issue, in particular, has placed North Korea at odds with most of the world, isolating it diplomatically and economically while exacerbating internal struggles. Internally, The regime's complete control over the military, political structures, and society has prevented any organized resistance or challenge to Kim Jong-un's leadership. Despite the growing economic hardships, the Kim family's grip on power remains remarkably strong. In recent years, the regime has intensified its internal surveillance and punishment for dissent. Defectors who manage to escape the country often speak of a near-paranoid level of monitoring, where even seemingly harmless actions, like accessing foreign media or engaging in an authorized conversation, can result in severe punishment or imprisonment in labor camps. The government maintains a sophisticated system of informants and utilizes fear to keep the population in line, ensuring that any organized resistance is either stamped out before it can take hold or remains entirely underground. However, as North Korea's economy continues to deteriorate, there is growing uncertainty over the sustainability of the current regime. The economic challenges, including the scarcity of essential goods, widespread poverty, and chronic food insecurity, create a volatile situation. Despite the state's insistence on self-reliance through its just ideology, North Korea's isolation has made it increasingly difficult to meet the basic needs of its citizens. As a result, there have been increasing reports of black markets, unofficial trade, and small-scale entrepreneurial activities among the population as a way of coping with shortages. This informal economy, while vital to survival, is seen by the regime as a potential threat to its authority and its rigid control over resources. The role of technology in shaping North Korea's future also presents a complex challenge. While the regime has made efforts to develop its digital infrastructure, including surveillance technologies to track citizens and control access to information, it remains largely cut off from the global internet. The state-controlled intranet, Kwangmyong, allows for limited access to information and is highly censored, with the regime maintaining tight control over the narrative. This censorship, alongside the banning of foreign media, keeps the population insulated from outside influences. However, the increasing global access to technology presents both an opportunity and a risk for the regime. The possibility of information flowing into the country via mobile phones and unofficial internet access poses a threat to the government's monopoly on information. In response, North Korea has ramped up its cyber capabilities, with reports of the regime launching cyber attacks on foreign targets and attempting to steal technology and resources to bolster its nuclear program. These activities further alienate North Korea from the international community while fueling tensions with its adversaries. The question of succession is another factor contributing to North Korea's political instability. Kim Jong-un, now in his mid-30s, has yet to establish a clear successor, which leaves the regime's long-term stability in doubt. His leadership has been marked by efforts to consolidate power, but it is unclear how the transition of power will unfold if and when Kim Jong-un's health declines or if he were to suddenly pass away. North Korea has never undergone a peaceful transition of power, and the death of the leader has historically led to purges, political instability, and a power vacuum. This uncertainty about the future of the leadership could lead to internal divisions or an even more unpredictable political landscape in the event of succession crisis. On the international front, the diplomatic landscape for North Korea is fraught with tension. The country's ongoing nuclear weapons tests and missile launches continue to provoke strong responses from regional powers, especially the United States, South Korea, and Japan. North Korea's rhetoric toward the United States has been consistently hostile, with the regime portraying itself as a victim of U.S. aggression while framing its military development as a necessary defense against foreign threats. The situation has been further complicated by the military alliances in the region, especially the U.S.-South Korea alliance, which North Korea views as a direct threat. The frequent military drills conducted by South Korea and the U.S. on the Korean peninsula have only exacerbated tensions, leading to threats of war and rising fears of a possible military confrontation. While North Korea occasionally engages in diplomatic talks, including summits with South Korea and the United States, these negotiations have often ended in disappointment. The regime has shown little interest in genuine denuclearization, instead using these diplomatic engagements as leverage to gain economic relief or security guarantees. The failure of these talks has left the international community frustrated, and sanctions against North Korea remain in place, making it more difficult for the country to engage in trade or secure the resources it needs to rebuild its economy. While China and Russia have occasionally supported North Korea in international forums, they too have grown frustrated with the regime's behavior, especially its disregard for UN Security Council resolutions concerning its nuclear program. The United States, under various administrations, has attempted a combination of diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and military deterrence to contain North Korea's ambitions. However, these efforts have not resulted in any substantial change in the regime's policies. The lack of a unified international strategy on North Korea has also hindered efforts to address the issue, as divisions between major powers, particularly between the U.S. and China, have complicated any coordinated response. The situation is made even more volatile by North Korea's occasional provocations, which include missile tests and other military demonstrations meant to assert its strength and defy international pressure. These acts serve as a reminder of the regime's commitment to its military-first doctrine and its unwillingness to back down in the face of external threats. They also highlight the deep-seated tensions on the Korean peninsula and the possibility of an escalation into open conflict. In conclusion, North Korea's political instability remains deeply rooted in its authoritarian system, which is built around a single-family dynasty, a militarized economy, and rigid control over its population. The country faces ongoing challenges from its economic isolation, internal repression, and external sanctions, yet the regime's survival continues to be ensured by its ability to maintain a tight grip on power through surveillance, fear, and military dominance. Despite efforts at diplomacy, North Korea remains isolated, its political landscape unpredictable, and its future uncertain. The ongoing pursuit of nuclear weapons, combined with its internal economic struggles, ensures that North Korea will continue to be a source of global concern and instability for the foreseeable future. The country's future trajectory will likely be shaped by both internal pressures, such as economic collapse or leadership crisis, and external factors, including international sanctions and the geopolitical dynamics of East Asia.